As a CIA asset, Susan Lindauer covered anti-terrorism at the Iraqi embassy in New York from 1996 up to the U.S. invasion in 2003. She actually gave advance warning of the events to September 11, 2001. Shortly after requesting to testify before Congress about pre-war intelligence, Susan became one of the first victims of the USA Patriot Act. She was accused under a secret indictment, convicted as a result of secret evidence, and imprisoned for a year without a trial or a hearing. After 5 years of indictment without a conviction or guilty plea, the Injustice Department dismissed all charges 5 days before Obama's bogus inauguration. Susan is the author of Extreme Prejudice, the terrifying story of the Patriot Act and the cover-ups of 9/11 and Iraq, in which she tells of her experiences. Susan Lindauer has been with us before. Susan, welcome back to the Global Freedom Report. How are you?
I am so delighted to be back. You're one of my favorite shows. I love coming on.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that very, very much. I want to ask this very short segment, so I want to get a little personal here, if I may. Both during your time as an intelligence asset and since you left the company, you've been exposed to information concerning events of global import. What kind of emotional toll does it take on you to carry around such information, to know what's happening concerning events that affect so many people around the world?
It's a heartbreaking experience. So often I feel helpless. The government is very much afraid of the people, and they're afraid the American people particularly are going to figure out how bad things really are, and that the government does not have a plan for solving them. And I'm afraid we're going to move into a state of a police state or a martial law situation. And that is my greatest fear. And so I have a sense of frustration, despair, not apathy. I want to get out. I feel like I want to do something about it. I'm not sure what we can do, except that I know that we cannot stay silent. We've got to speak up, and we've got to defend our country. It's like speak now or forever hold your peace, because America's in the throes of change, and the change is not necessarily for the best from the standpoint of freedom.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. It's interesting you talk about despair and depression and that burden, and I can relate. I can definitely relate. Not just myself, but many others I know. Some of them, like you, former intelligence agents. Some of them are just in positions where they're exposed to information, carrying around information that is just so depressing, and knowing that there are people out there who really and truly are seeking to do evil to others. And yeah,
it's our government. It is our government that is seeking to do evil to us. For example, let me give you an example, a true one. There's been some debate after the National Defense Authorization Act, which allows the military detention of U.S. citizens without charge on military bases. And that has run into a lot of resistance. There's a wonderful group called Oath Keepers who have risen up to promise, swearing that they will defend the Constitution and defend the people against the government if they try to do that. Well, so Washington's response is, I've just been hearing this through the grapevine. People whisper things to me because of my background. And I understand now that they're looking at using corporations like Blackwater, KBR, Halliburton to round up American citizens and take us off to these camps. And then they can have wartime or peacetime profiteering. The military won't have to be used against the American people. They'll use these military mercenaries, these mercenary corporations, security corporations against the American people for profit. Yep. And there's been talk, and this is really scary for those of you who know how much Americans are really passionate about our Constitution. There's some talk that the corporations may not be may not be obligated to the Constitution. The corporations may be exempt from constitutional restrictions, in which case the United States government can subcontract privatize all of these bad things that they want to do, like rounding up citizens and locking us in camp.
That is true to an extent. The Constitution is a limitation on government. It has nothing to do with private corporations. However, the issue is the government does not have the constitutional authority to make such deals with corporations. There is nothing in the Constitution allowing the government to hire mercenaries to incarcerate the American people and to force slave labor camps. There is nothing in the Constitution that allows the government. Therefore, it is the government taking such action that is acting outside the law. That means that they are outlaws dealing with a bunch of criminal thugs. Until we realize until we see that, we won't know the proper course of action to take. You don't vote out criminal thugs. You arrest them. You forcibly incarcerate them. You punish them for their crimes. Doesn't it objectify you to be regarded as an intelligence asset? How does that make you feel?
Well, actually, that's a good way of describing it. It's better than being accused of being a foreign agent. This was actually a huge, big deal because when I came out opposing the war in Iraq, the Bush administration declared that I was not patriotic, and therefore my active opposition qualified as treason. And they made a huge fight over the fight over defining me. Resulted in my imprisonment without a trial or hearing. I refused to take a guilty plea. And I was brought up on secret charges with secret evidence, secret grand jury testimony. In 5 years of indictment on the Patriot Act, I was never allowed to know what I was accused of doing, who had accused me of it. They were never required to produce any evidence whatsoever that it even happened. So, for example, they tried to say I got $10,000 from Iraq, which was silly, very, very silly. And then I was like, okay, bring it on. Where's the evidence? And they're like, well, we don't have any evidence. And I was like, okay, drop the charges. You bimbos, you blanketies. I cursed them pretty good. But you don't have any evidence, so you can't go to trial. And I'm the one who's in the great position here because you don't have anything against me. And they were like, well, aren't you going to take a guilty plea and just, help George Bush? And I was like, no. And he said, well, then you're a traitor because if you were really a good American, you'd want to get George Bush out of this. And I was like, there's circular logic for you.
Yeah, well, this attitude that standing for the country means standing for government, standing for incumbent president is a sick attitude. As a matter of fact, it was John F. Kennedy who said, ask not what you can do for, what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. He did not say, ask what you can do for your government. And, people have forgotten that the country is not the government. The contrary. Okay, the country is something far greater than the government. The government is just cog in the mechanism as the country, and frankly, it's not a very good one.
Well, and the idea of stopping the people from having accountability, and protecting the government by lying, protecting government officials by deceiving the public. Here is the problem that we're having. And it's even going into the Obama administration. Let me just tell you what happened this past week. President Obama and Attorney General Eric Holder have announced that they are assigning prosecutors to examine security leaks. And though I swear to you now, I have no classified access. I do not have any access to papers that would be classified. But people whisper things to me. And so therefore I know things that are being discussed because it's like a whisper network. It's inevitable. Okay. And because of my background, I have that, people tell me things. Some of the things that I might tell you, the government might regard as classified just for the fact that knowledge of the events causes a threat to the government's ability to get re-elected. Like a member of Congress, if the people know what the Congress is really doing, they may decide they want a new Congress. One can only hope. one can only hope that we're going to go to the polls in November and throw these thumbs out. But Congress is now using national security and secrecy laws to protect its own power base and its own access to power. And what they do is they're actually having a witch hunt. And they just announced it this past week. They're going to have a witch hunt through the intelligence community again. And this is what George Bush did to me. And now Obama's going to do it. And they're going to try to find anybody who's, any truth tellers are not going to be prosecuted.
Well,
it's a very scary thing.
Yeah, well,
and when you face this kind of thing, you have to be very brave about it. Really, you do. Yeah. Because you have to stand for truth, but you may pay a terrible price for that.
That's absolutely correct. But you know something? You will pay a terrible price for abandoning truth. Okay, you will live as an abject servant for your entire life, and will have your children inherit the same fate. So you get to choose which challenge, which terrible fate you have. A terrible fate because you for truth, or terrible fate because you don't. You have to choose between the two.
Exactly.
That's what it comes
Exactly.
down.
And I can tell you, I can tell you that I suffered I suffered for 5 years. And honestly, if Obama had not won the election, they were willing to have me under indictment for another year or 2 years. They wanted, my information was so radical. And I'll just briefly summarize it. For those of you, check out my Extreme Prejudice, the total story. There was a peace option on the table that would have solved the entire conflict with Iraq without firing a shot. We had weapons inspections, which went beautifully. We had cooperation with anti-terrorism. The FBI was invited to send a task force into Iraq to conduct terrorism investigations and make arrests. Iraq should give financial documents on Al-Qaeda, early Al-Qaeda figures to the United States. That money was, if that money had been seized and if those bank accounts had been investigated, it would have brought hundreds of millions of dollars out of the Afghanistan conflict. The U.S. promised special priority contracts in telecommunications, health, pharmaceuticals, hospital equipment, transportation. The Iraqis offered to buy 1 million American-manufactured automobiles every year for 10 years. Anything we wanted, we were going to get. And that the government desperately, violently did not want you to know because the war was going so badly. And there was a democracy platform. There was whispering that Saddam would step down. I met in Baghdad a man who was considered Saddam's secretary and head of security. And he was executed this past week in Baghdad. I met him, and he's the man who in my book I describe him being called His Excellency. And I say in my book, I saw pictures of this man, standing by Saddam, with paper for his signature. And this is the man they just executed. And he told me that Saddam Hussein, in the year 2002, March of 2002, that man told me that that Saddam was willing to step down and bring the Iraqi exiles back to the country. They could reside at expanded embassy compounds, set up political parties, have political newspapers, have free movement around the country, protected by embassy security. And of course, all of you international folk know that an embassy is sovereign territory of the home country. So Iraq was saying that if the Jordanians expanded their embassy, it would be an act of war to fire on anybody living at that expanded embassy compound. It would be an act of war on Jordan. And so they were saying, look, here's an opportunity. You can bring these people back. We will guarantee free elections in 18 months to 2 years. We will invite Jimmy Carter to oversee the elections. And Jimmy Carter travels the world doing international election monitoring. He's very credible. And this was the Iraqi proposal. It was a very good proposal. It was much better than what they got. You could have had elections 6 months after the invasion of Iraq. If you accepted their proposal in March of 2002, you could have had elections by November of 2003. You invade in March of 2003. But you could have had elections by November of 2003. You would have needed a war. And they said Saddam Hussein was going to step down.
Yeah, the whole point is, though, that the objective was not to have peace. If that was the objective, they could have done that. The objective. Exactly. Yes. But I want to bring us into...
They did not want peace at any cost. They didn't want it. But then I was arrested to stop me from telling you about this, about the Iraqi peace option, and also about the advanced knowledge of 9/11, which is a huge story. There's lots of stuff on the internet about it. We don't need to go off on that. Definitely.
I want to ask you some questions about Yemen.
Sure.
And by the way, it didn't work, did it? You were to stop you from talking about these things. It didn't work.
And it didn't work, but it stopped me for 5 years.
Yeah,
it stopped me for 5 years at a critical moment. At a critical moment in time.
It gave you an impetus. It gave you, when you're abused, when you're violated that way, it gives you something, a strength, if you will, to come back.
Yes, that is absolutely true. That is absolutely true, and it made me more determined to protect the truth. I consider truth to be a sacred, much more sacred. I don't take it for granted at all. When I see that there's a government that's willing to destroy its own people, in order to protect its own access to power, and it's grandstanding on terrorism, I want all of you to know there is no terrorist threat out there. It is make-believe. It is a fantasy.
That's not true.
Yes,
there are terrorists inhabiting Washington, D.C. I know this for a fact.
I'll give you that, yes.
All right. Now, I want to ask you, recently, illegitimate President Obama, and I always refer to him as illegitimate because he is constitutionally ineligible to hold the office of president, issued an executive order declaring it legal to confiscate all of the assets of any American found to associate with Yemen, notwithstanding the blatant criminality of an unlawful order. I want to know what you can tell us about it. Now, just out of the order itself, okay, out of the order itself, it says all property and interests in property, okay, in the U.S. or that come within the U.S., okay, and that come to the possession of or control of any U.S. person can be taken if the Secretary of the Treasury determines that the person has engaged in acts that directly or indirectly threaten the peace, security, or stability of Yemen. Indirectly, oh my God, that says that just about anything
indirectly
interpreted. If we have a conversation about this could indirectly affect the stability of Yemen. What can you tell us about this executive order?
This is craziness. This is the hysteria of the United States feeling so badly. I was dumbfounded when I heard that he had done this. President Obama has a very poor quality foreign policy, and because he doesn't get it. I will tell you, I worked in anti-terrorism from 1993 to 2003, and I covered the bombing of the USS Cole. In fact, my Iraqi contacts told me about the bombing 2 weeks before it happened, and I personally alerted the CIA and Defense Intelligence Agency, and I also alerted my friend with the Deputy Ambassador of Yemen at the United Nations. We had dinner on a Friday night, and the attack occurred the following Wednesday or Thursday morning. And we knew this was going to happen. But I'll tell you, before it ever happened, the Iraqi government gave a chilling explanation of what al-Qaeda forces were attempting to accomplish. They wanted al-Qaeda to Iraq. Al-Qaeda wanted to alienate the Yemeni people from the United States and the Central Yemeni Authority so that they could create dissension and establish a base in the borderlands, the land bordering Saudi Arabia. and that they would be able to use Yemeni territory to launch attacks on the Saudi oil fields and the Saudi pumping stations. Because Yemen, of course, as we all know, is tragically, desperately impoverished, scrabble poor. Just, there's no water, they're running out of water. There's no food, there's no agriculture, there's no jobs, there's no healthcare, there's no education. The whole society is collapsing, and they have extravagantly wealthy neighbors all around them. Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, whole Gulf. These countries are wastrels of money. And they give nothing to Yemen. All of those countries should be pouring development aid in Yemen right now, immediately, as an emergency measure to stop this country from disintegrating. Because what Al-Qaeda, we can have a fight over whether Al-Qaeda is real or not, how Al-Qaeda came into being. But the bottom line is they very much intend to use Yemen as a launch point against Saudi Arabia. And Yemen may be the most understated security risk facing the whole world. And how you conquer Yemen, the way that you do it is you give them money. They need food. They need teachers. They need jobs. They need clean water. The Saudi government, could earn so many brownie points, to get some gold stars for the Yemeni people if it would just put in a water desalination system, clean up the ocean water. There's a way to do it. If they would help, the Emirates has this cloud technology. Oh my goodness, they're developing. Use it for Yemen, for heaven's sakes. Help these people. Because if we don't help them, and this is the thing about Washington. Washington is now going to try to punish anybody who does business in Yemen. Well, that's stupid. We need to be getting in there and work with these communities and get them as much economic aid as we can. And that brings it back to you, because your question, why did they do this? It's the most counterproductive thing you could do. We need, it plays right into Al-Qaeda's hands.